this demonstration, we'll take a look at how to install a certificate authority on a Windows server. I'm going to start by clicking on the Start button and go into Server Manager. And with Windows Server, anytime you want to install software, you go to the Manage menu and you can add a role or feature that comes with Windows. So I'm going to choose to add a role or feature. Gives us our welcome screen. We can choose Next. Wants to know what it is that we're trying to do, install a role or a feature-based installation, or install remote desktop services. We're going to do a role install. Wants to know what server we want to do the install for. Notice that servera.certworld.loc is selected, so we choose Next. Then it wants to know what role, and there's all kinds of different roles here. So if I wanted to host a bunch of virtual machines, I could install Hyper-V, for instance, is here. We do have DHCP services, DNS services. So all these are different roles that you can go and add to your Windows server. Now in this example, I want to be able to create certificates. So I need to install the Active Directory certificate services. So I choose that checkbox to install that role. And it pops up and says, do you want the admin tools as well? Yes, we want to add the feature of the administration tools. So then we choose Next, and then choose Next, choose Next, and then it wants to know which of the services within this role we want to install. So we do want the certification authority, so that's the actual CA itself, but then they have a bunch of certificate enrollment services that you could also install, and these help us create or request certificates through different methods. So there's a policy web service, there's a web service. I do want to install the web enrollment tool, so I chose that. And when I install the web enrollment tool, the purpose of this is it's a website that users can visit that will allow them to submit a request for a certificate. So I'm going to install that plus the certificate authority. Notice that we can also have an enrollment service for network devices like routers and switches. And then we also have an online responder, which is responsible for checking revocation list. So I'm just going to go with the certificate authority and the web enrollment service and then choose Next. So those two components of certificate services. And then I hit the install button and our installation will proceed. This will take a few minutes, but once installation is completed, we'll be ready to move on to the next step. So the installation is completed. It took probably about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. You can see here it lets us know that certificate services was installed successfully. And it also lets us know that we do have to configure certificate services. Now I'm not going to choose that link. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose close here. And what I want you to notice is up top here in Server Manager, anytime you install a role that needs configuration steps performed after you install the role, you'll see this little yellow triangle there in the notification. So I click on the little yellow triangle and it pops up and says, oh, you got some post-deployment configuration that you need to perform. So here I'm going to configure the Active Directory certificate services. So I choose that link and it pops up with a configuration wizard where I need to go through and confirm a few of the settings as far as certificate services is concerned. So it pops up and says, great, what credentials do you want to use? I do want to use my current credentials, which is as an administrator account. So I choose Next. Wants to know what services we want to configure. What I want you to notice here is notice that we only have the first two options as checkboxes that I can select, because these are the role services that I installed, the certificate authority and the web enrollment tool. Notice the other ones I can't choose here. And notice that when I choose the checkbox, it's expanding the configuration wizard. So that service has configuration settings that are going to need to be specified. So I choose those two checkboxes and say, yes, I do want to configure these, and then we choose Next. Now, as far as the certificate authority goes, the first thing the wizard wants to know is what type of CA am I trying to create? Am I trying to create an enterprise CA that's part of an Active Directory environment, or am I trying to create a standalone CA, which is typically a standalone server part of a work group? Right? With a standalone CA, you don't need Active Directory, but with an enterprise CA, we do. So I'm going to go with an enterprise CA, and I choose Next. Wants to know whether we're trying to create a root CA or a subordinate CA. And basically what you can do here is organizations can create a hierarchical structure of CAs. And remember, CAs are responsible for giving or issuing certificates out to different users and applications on the network. So if you have a large enterprise, having one CA is probably not going to be enough. A lot of times what companies will do is each location might have its own CA. So for that reason, you might create a hierarchical structure where you create a root CA at head office, but maybe there's a subordinate CA at each location. So I'm just going to go with a root CA and then choose next. Wants to know what to do about the certificate authority's private key. Now, the certificate authority, the CA will create its own private key, so it's a self-signed certificate. So yes, we want to create a brand new private key, but if you did have an existing private key that you wanted to use for the CA, you could do that as well, but we're going to create a brand new one. Then it wants to know what cryptographic provider to use. We're just going to accept the defaults here. Notice that over to the right, we have the key length or strength, so 2048, and notice the hashing algorithm as well is selected here. So it went with SHA-256. So we're going to choose next. Then it wants to know what the common name of the CA is. We're just going to call it server A. And then choose next. Wants to know how long the certificates are valid for that are generated by the CA. So I'm going to set this to 10 years. And then choose next. Wants to know where to store the database and also where to store log files. I'll accept the default location and then choose next. Summarizes all of our settings, and then we hit configure, and within the next few minutes it's going to go and configure our certificate services. Actually, it's finished already. That was pretty quick. So I'm going to hit close. And now we have certificate services installed. Now, just to verify that certificate services is installed, what I typically like to do is go up to the tools menu, and if it installed successfully, you should have a certification authority management console. So I typically like to launch this and make sure that I have that green check mark over here on the left that shows the status of the CA is good. So in this demonstration, you saw how to install a certificate authority on a Windows server.